Started. Okay, so we are live. I'm here with Dr. Melanie Acosta. One, thank you so much for your time and for being here with us today, and being willing to share a little bit more about your white paper that you've so graciously shared with the CRESTS community. So I wanted to start off just by allowing you to introduce yourself and tell the folks who might be listening who might not know you, just tell us a little bit more about yourself in relation to what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Ashley, to you and the entire brilliant folks at the CREST Center with this organization for inviting me into this space to share a very important dialogue that is very timely and certainly the crux of um, my my agency and my partnership with communities and the work that I do. So my name is Melanie Acosta. I am entering this space from a multiplicity of experiences. Um, I said multiplicity, but it's multiplicity, I believe. Multiplicity of experiences are multiple experiences that contextualize my relationship with the topic of these school and classroom factors that impact achievement. I would say mostly I'm entering this space as an African American woman parent who has been at the forefront of navigating school systems and structures for almost 21 years. My oldest is will be 21 in July. And so having that perspective to see the everyday ways that schooling structures and classroom structures alienate Black children. And conversely, having some opportunities to see ways that classroom and schooling structures are sanctuaries and spaces where Black children can and should thrive like any other racial group. I also enter this space as a former elementary school teacher of African American children. Um, and from this vantage point, I've been able to see the possibilities of what can happen when we organize as the adults in the space, whether you are a teacher, whether you are a counselor, whether you are a psychologist or administrator, to see the potential of what happens when we take the responsibility to orchestrate an environment, to orchestrate a classroom ethos and culture that is predicated on the humanity of Black and Brown children, that is inherently connected to and treasures and centers Black and Brown children and their families and communities, humanity and well-being. So just having opportunities to be a teacher in that space, to partner with children and their families from that auspice has certainly been part of the relationship I have to the topic. And then I'm entering this space as a researcher, as a teacher education researcher, really following in a rich tradition of Black studies scholarship, also some Africana studies, and really using the tool of research to, number one, describe excellence as it has historically and contemporarily been manifested within African American community. So excellence in education, because we've always had a standard, a barometer. We've always had ideas, really powerful ideas about how our children should be educated and why and for what purposes. So part of my research is describing that richly, not only for the broader community, but for us. I'm finding that I'm doing a lot more work that is just really for us. And when I say us, I mean Black and Brown communities that we can use, and also using research, to challenge what I've called pedagogical hegemony. So pedagogy references, curriculum, instruction, and teaching. So the
Mm-hmm.
hegemony, the certain ways that we interact with Black and Brown children, the way that we present content to them, the kind of experiences as teachers that we create for them, how
Mm-hmm.
that has been bound up within a Eurocentric
Right.
um, way of thinking and acting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Such that it presents itself as the normal way or the natural way or the only way of
Mm-hmm.
teaching Black children. So my work seeks to challenge that, seeks to uproot that as normal, as natural, as humane,
Mm-hmm.
and use the frameworks that we have out there, like culturally relevant pedagogy, African
Mm-hmm.
American pedagogical excellence,
Mm-hmm.
culturally sustaining or responsive pedagogies, use those as the emancipatory antidote, right?
Mm-hmm.
The potential ways to redress
Mm-hmm.
those instructional hegemonic things that are happening in very mundane ways in the classroom. So that was a very long introduction. So thank you for, bearing with me there.
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing with us a little about like who you are coming into this space. I think it's so important when we're receiving these messages to like understand, who it is that we're talking to. So
Yeah.
I hear you some highlights from that, where you mentioned that you're a parent. So there's like a very personal connection to what we're going to talk about.
Mhm.
A former elementary teacher, and then now like a teacher, educator, researcher, wanting to kind of challenge, whitewash pedagogy and ways of thinking and learning and knowing. So that's certainly helpful. And so as we think about these school and classroom level factors that affect our Black and Latinx students and their learning, I'm curious, you did start off your paper, which was amazing, by the way. So I hope that by the time this comes out, that folks will have access to it. You start off the paper describing like the historical context of how our communities have been associated and how like education and literacy are conceptualized. And you kind of got at this in your introduction, but I'm wondering from your perspective and your role as like a parent, a former student, an educator, how important is it for people across the board to understand and like be aware of this historical context from this culturally diverse perspective that you talked about? Like, how important is it for us to really understand where we come from and like what has transpired in the past up until the present?
Oh gosh. As the kids would say, oh, it's everything. It's so important. John Henry Clark, he writes beautiful. He was a seminal scholar in Africana studies, and he writes beautifully on the role of Africa in understanding not just Black history, but world history, and the beauty of history. And I'm not gonna repeat it verbatim, but some of the things he says when he talks about history is like, history is everything, but it's a starting point. It's your compass. It tells you where you've been, and it gives you clues to why things are the way they are, right? And so I think
Mhm,
the historical context um, allows us to nuance and uproot again the seeming naturalness or permanence
mhm,
of the structures that we have in place right now, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
for example, so one year when I was a classroom teacher, I was taking over a second grade classroom, and beautiful Black children. And I was taken over in the middle of the year for a young white man teacher who, according to the principal, he wasn't cutting it.
mhm,
So I was just moving back to Gainesville, Florida at the time, and put my application in to get into the
mhm,
classroom, and she hired me to take over
mhm,
his position, which in the middle of the year. And so I had an opportunity before I started to come the last couple days um, and just observe and be in the space and
mhm,
talk to the former teacher, get to know my future colleagues, yada, yada, yada. And
mhm,
I'll never forget the white man whose class I was taking over, he was cleaning up the classroom and just making small talk. I was in there and he says, he has a package of rice cakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Ooh, make sure you get some of these. They love food. If you give them food, you can get them to do anything." And Ashley, I was so triggered.
Wow.
I was so triggered by the way he associated our children to um, what I was thinking, like animalistic features,
Right.
or just a negation of their humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So using food to try to get compliance, which is the
Mm-hmm.
overall goal when you go in a lot of schools where Black children are, compliance, not learning,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Not even once looking at your own instruction. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, it's it's ideas like that, and ideas like I've had many teachers that I've interacted with and observed and tell me that, oh, well, I have to talk to them that way, them meaning Black children, that
Right.
way meaning yelling and screaming. um I have to talk to them that way because that's all they know, that's all
Mm.
that they'll respond to, right?
Mm.
Those are anti-Black ideologies
Right.
that permeate
Mm-hmm.
the instructional norm.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, history, providing a rich, holistic history,
Mm-hmm.
not just of what white people were doing, right? But what Black and brown people were doing, have been doing, and will continue to do. So you can see this kind of enduring, um, you know, bifurcation of oppression and resistance,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
we've always resisted, and we used educating our children and ensuring that they receive excellence in education as one of our really powerful forms of resistance
Mm-hmm.
to the oppressive the oppressive conditions that we were living in, particularly oppression that's meted out in the thinking and categorizing of our children
Mm-hmm.
as less human,
Mm-hmm.
less intelligent. And so the historical record really provides that context
Mm-hmm.
to help us understand how we got to this point. Things that we're experiencing now that we see as the cause, no, they're really the consequences,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if you allow yourself to dig into history and understand histories, you will see that we are in a constant state of consequence,
Mm-hmm.
consequence. That's what we're
Mm-hmm.
noticing. But we can't make sense of it in powerful ways because we don't have an appropriate understanding of history and the histories
Right.
of people in this country to help us interpret and make sense of what we're noticing.
Yes, right on. I love that you said it's everything because even I think that, the historical context of things oftentimes is ignored. Like we just do things the way we've been doing them because that's always how we've done it. And because it works whole time, it's actually not working, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm glad that you put a spotlight on that in your
yeah.
paper.
Yeah, and
And you also,
actually to keep us bound within is not consistent with a lot of principles um, and ways of thinking and knowing across African, Indigenous, and Asian communities,
mhm,
right? So there's so much value in looking back and
mhm,
reflecting on that and understanding where you came from. I know in the African um, epistemology, there's this principle of Sankofa, right?
mhm,
Not only is it that it's okay to look back, but it is so important
right.
to look back. And when you
Mhm,
see that symbol of that bird looking back with the eggs, right, with the babies, that implicates the role of historical knowledge and
mm,
consciousness
mhm,
in the securing of our legacy, which is our children, and
mhm.
ensuring that they are cared for, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. I also love, so this kind of leads me to my next question, because I love how you kind of touched on the association of like within our communities of like education and literacy with like freedom and power and resistance, or like proper education when it's done the way that that is meant to liberate and educate in an authentic way. Um, and then you also touched on, you know, the aura of like compliance versus like genuine true learning. And then something in your paper that you mentioned was how our school systems tend to produce workers and not critical thinkers. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective as a parent, educator, teacher, educator, researcher, um, what that is like for you having to navigate a system in which everyone around you is, you know, pushing compliance. Maybe you yourself were, you know, a part of that system as well at some point, and having to kind of reteach or unlearn those sorts of things. But what do you do as like a parent or an educator to try to produce critical thinkers or produce systems or change systems so that we are teaching kids to think for themselves, as opposed to just complying and just being a receptacle of the textbook? What does that look like to make that shift from producing workers to critical thinkers?
Mm, mm. Right. So if time permits, maybe I can comment from the different roles that I wear. So
Mm-hmm.
um, as a parent, it has it has positioned me as, you know, my children's greatest cheerleader and advocate.
Mm-hmm.
And it also has positioned me as public enemy number one from a school perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Schools don't tend to like parents like me, Black parents
Right.
like me,
Mm-hmm.
who who desire to be involved, who parents, I'm a parent who is going to be involved, but I'm going to be involved in the ways that it matters to me. So in
Mm-hmm.
terms of understanding and negotiating and talking with schools and teachers about the kind of instruction and
Mm-hmm.
curriculum that my children have to consume,
Mm-hmm.
the assessments that they're given,
Mm-hmm.
what the school is doing with money. So we know in the state of Florida, a lot of schools have a school advisory council.
Mm-hmm.
And then schools also have a PTA or PTO.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I never really, I never really was interested in being on the PTA or PTO, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was really interested in the school advisory council because
Mm-hmm.
they were making decisions that connected Title I funding to
Mm.
types of resources and programs that would come into the school.
Right.
And so I had to be strategic about my involvement,
Mm-hmm.
just being in that space to be part of the group that was really trying to push for the use of Title I dollars to be used in ways that could sincerely and authentically
Mm-hmm.
bring about um, support for Black students.
Mm.
So it's being strategic, being involved and being strategic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly, from a parent standpoint, it's relentless. It is,
Mm-hmm.
it's, it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just had to have an interaction with my sixth graders. One of his teachers who just whether it was intentional or not, but used the platform of Microsoft Teams to try to challenge my son's character,
Mm.
attacking his believability. And, it's one thing to have to protect my children when they go to the school, but for my child to be in my home, his sanctuary, this is his
Right.
sanctuary, and you
Mm-hmm.
encroach upon his humanity in his sanctuary in our home. And so I had to be corrective with the teacher on that end.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think for me as a parent, it was also important to allow my children to witness the kind of agency and advocacy that my husband and I
Mm-hmm.
um, were doing on their behalf in education. Not because I was interested in them hero worshiping me or being so grateful and to speak about that, but really helping them learn how to use your voice, how to speak up when things are not right, and speak up for yourself, and that it's okay, right? And also so they can go in there with confidence and know that if something happens, my mom and my dad are someone who loves me and cares for me. The people that I come from, they are going to they're going to have my back. So that was important from a parent standpoint. I think from the standpoint of as a researcher, as a teacher educator, I've really been interested in um, bringing what I have to contribute directly to the people. So part of me works with educators, right? Cultivating their dispositions and developing their practices. But there's more and more of me that is wanting to work directly with people to bring what I have, what I've been blessed to learn and know and be able to do, to bring that directly to the people, so that we are not so reliant on the benevolence of others to ensure that our children have what they need.
Right.
So that's been really important for me from a research and a teacher education standpoint.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's so important. I think that, so you touched on this as well, kind of like the socio-emotional piece of how the school systems view and treat Black and Latino and Indigenous students. And I think even with that, it's kind of tied to like exactly what you're talking about with how you go to bat for your I think you mentioned your sixth graders specifically, but also how you are facilitating educators, their development in research spaces and in education spaces on what that looks like to be treating those kids the right way so that they don't have to have parents that have to go to bat for them and advocate for them in the same ways that you've had to with yours.
And really working with educators or working with people who are interested in supporting children, really as a teacher educator, taking every moment I can to get to the root. Right. So when I first started as a professor, and I laugh about this, I thought that, okay, if I can just help these teachers learn these culturally responsive strategies and instructional approaches, then they'll go in there and they will, teach
Flourish.
Black and brown children in powerful ways. And I'm laughing at that because unless we get to the root, right, we can't get to that part. Right. That part loses its meaning, it loses its value, it loses its potency. If we are not before and simultaneously getting to the root that makes, culturally relevant pedagogy, African American pedagogical excellence, makes those things necessary, valuable, and important. So, I need to clarify that because truly, as a teacher educator, that is my predominant focus. In addition to doing being in and amongst and bringing things to the people, is really taking every instructional opportunity I can as a teacher educator to challenge and uproot the root causes.
Yes, and that ties directly back to the historical piece that we were talking about earlier. So I'm seeing all the connections, and I also I can see now why the connection was made between Dr. West Olatunji and yourself, because everything you're saying is so aligned with the mission and the vision and what the CREST program is all about. So a couple more questions. You did have a call to action in your paper, which I love because we're all about action with the CREST program. We want to obviously be thinking about the historical pieces and all the theoretical components, but also what we can be doing to help change these systems that are not benefiting us in this day and age or ever. And so in your call to action, you did encourage folks to engage in more of that emancipatory research that you were talking about, including evaluation and that sort of thing, and to kind of reposition the way that we think about Black and Indigenous education and knowledge. So that coupled with, I'm thinking about what you were sharing about your own experience as a parent, and you just seem really like fired up, right? But my question for you is, how do we get folks on board who maybe aren't as fired up? They're burnt out, they're exhausted. We just had a webinar on burnout and burnout prevention.
Yeah,
how do we get folks involved who are not as fired up as us, that may be satisfied with the status quo? And this could be our parents, educators, policymakers. Like, what do we do with those folks that are like, this is what we always done, this is working for us? How do we get them on board?
Yeah. Can I share 2 short stories? I'm a storyteller.
Yes.
And I'm
yes,
really
please.
the value of story. I was moved by Toni Morrison's 1992 interview and comments, and so I've taken that to heart. So in 1992, she was given an interview about her novel at the time, Beloved, and I believe Jazz Arsula, but she talked about, writing for her, moving beyond the white gaze. And in order to do that, she wanted to focus on how things felt and what they meant, right? Not just telling me what it is, not this very descriptive state, which we can do at a distance and really obscure the beauty and the value of things, but to focus on what it feels like and what it means. And so I'm leaning really heavy into that and the tradition of storytelling and witnessing and testifying. So indulge me, let me share 2
Please, yeah.
short stories when you talk about how to get people on board. So previously, I was an assistant professor at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And I was very fortunate enough, blessed enough to cultivate a relationship with a local elementary school that was supposed to serve African-American children. It was in a historic African-American community in the area that was economically experiencing economic oppression as well. And so I partnered with this one teacher, and I got to go partner with her and go to the classroom, go into her 3rd grade classroom and teach reading every week. I got to go one day, about 2 to 3 hours at a time. And I would say on a side note, this is something that I had to cultivate on my own. It was not something that my university, my college, or my department readily had in place, and didn't readily value in processes of tenure and promotion. I think that's important. That's another dialogue, but I need to drop that there. Let me
adjacent, yes.
That there, yeah.
We'll pivot.
And so I developed this relationship with her, and across 2 years, I went in and I taught reading. And when we first began, she demonstrated the perspectives, really anti-Black educational perspectives about the beautiful Black children that she was teaching, especially that first year. And it was very hard for me to be in that space. It was hard. But the way our relationship worked, I came in, I taught, we planned together, we debriefed. At first, it was a lot of me just coming in and teaching, and she would observe or do something else while I was teaching. But over time, it manifested into us team teaching and us doing a lot of debriefing. And I would go in and I would teach, just have a great experience. That one day, that 2 to 3 hours, just have a great experience with those children, and just really enjoyed it. And the kids enjoyed it. We did some dope stuff in literacy. And she would observe. She started recording videos of what we were doing and what I was doing with the kids. She started taking pictures. So all of these that I'm telling you, all these micro transformations she was doing, she started asking me questions. right? But at first it was just observing, like, okay, thank you, see you next time. But then she started with the questions, asking me questions, questions like, oh, okay, where'd you get that from? What resources are you doing? Then she started sharing about her own experiences, like, oh, I used to do that, and that was something that I did, and I was trying this. Then she started taking pictures and recording videos when I would come in with students, right? And so that first year, midway, at the halfway point, it was around December. I had been in there since August. Around December, we were having a conversation, debriefing conversation after school. And I knew I got her where exactly where I wanted her when she said, I see the way they respond to you. They don't respond to me the same way. And it was a mixture of sincerity. If I'm saying this word right, contrition. She was convicted, right? And reflexivity, right? She was noticing that, but then she was turning the lens on, okay, these the same children. She black woman, I'm a black woman, right? She's a little older than me, right? And she's noticing they respond dramatically different to you. They visibly show you how much they care for you. They will do for you whatever it is. They're engaged, they're excited, their hands are going up, they are smiling, they're experiencing joy when they're learning, and they are thinking at critical high levels. They're doing that for you. They're not doing that for me, right? I knew I had her where I wanted her, because the second half of the year was more of those micro transformations of, she was texting me saying, when I couldn't come into the classroom, she started texting me saying, ooh, I'm thinking about trying this. What do you think? I have this book. I wanted to read this. What do you think about this? Like, we can't wait to see you. It wasn't just you coming in teaching them. No, then it became a we.
Right.
And so in terms of getting people on board, I think it's a matter of, especially when we talk about, helping them create visions of possibility. When we talk about Black and Brown children and their education, I've experienced the most success, and this is with practicing teachers and prospective teachers and parents and community workers, when I have rendered myself vulnerable and joined them in doing the work that they initially see as impossible. They see it as impossible to engage Black children in reading, especially Black boys. Oh, that's impossible. Everybody knows Black children can't read, don't like to read. Their parents aren't reading to them at home, which they say is a staple, which it is not, right? So they see the impossible. And so I've been really successful when I can partner with them and help them cultivate counter narratives of possibility, right? Because that impossibility that they have, that they see initially, that's undergirded by a perspective and stories of impossibility. So in the process of working with them to show them what's possible, I am uprooting, right, those narratives that they've been clinging to of impossibility, and showing them what's possible in a way that says, you can do this too. You can do this too, because sometimes we position effectiveness with Black children as, oh, that's just too hard for me. Oh, I can't do that. Well, you can do that. And that's the way we position good Black educators, right? We treat them as magical Negroes or the magic pill. Like, oh, well, they can do that, right? But no,
It's doable.
Right. It's a humanizing pedagogy for all humans. And so doing those things, bearing witness, being witness, and helping folks cultivate those narratives of possibility, I think for me have been very effective in getting people on board. Also, what's been effective is to find my people that I don't have to convince. Um, who are ready to go and build with them, still
Mm-hmm.
allowing myself to show and um, partner with those who need convincing, but I can't get encapsulated in just a mode of convincing.
Right.
I I have to find my people for whom it's not a matter of convincing, it's a matter of let's go get it, right?
Right.
Let's go do it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's build it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's if you build it, they will come. Those are those people. I
Right.
needed to find those people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, thank goodness for CREST, right?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so those two things have been important. And then very quickly, that second story, I'll just be very quick.
Okay.
When I was a grad student, um, I I started my PhD when I was 9 months pregnant with my fourth child.
Wow.
I was very blessed. I was a full-time student.
Mm-hmm.
My husband worked. I had stopped, come out of the classroom. So I was a
Mm-hmm.
full-time doc student and I could be at home with my then infant. But around 1.5, 2, I had a assistantship opportunity where I'd be, doing some summer work, doing some teaching of pre-service teachers in a literacy clinic. But I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have anyone who could watch my little one for those 3 or 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And in walked Miss Linda. She was in her 60s at the time,
Mm-hmm.
Black woman. She had worked at my parents' restaurant. And I don't know how it fell out, but I came into the restaurant, talking to my parents about my need, and there she was. And so it just turns out that Miss Linda started caring for my little one when he was about one and a
Mm-hmm.
half, two, till he was about 3. And at
Mm-hmm.
that time, I Miss Linda and I would talk before I would go to the office or whatever. We talk about Julian and what we wanted and things. And I remember saying, like, okay, Miss Linda, what's really important, all I want you to do with him right now is just read to him, sing to him, talk to him, play with him, expose him to things, right? That was when
Mm-hmm.
he was around 1. And when he got 2 and 3, I was like, okay, Miss Linda, so now we can start introducing, alphabet knowledge.
Right.
We have these type of activities to help him get familiar with the alphabet and what. And so she would do it. And, lo and behold, she told me one day, this was around 2.5, 3, we were just talking about Julian's progress and how well he was doing as a talker, as a
Mm-hmm.
thinker, as a emergent reader. And
Mm-hmm.
she was like, um, everything that you taught me, everything you showed me, I started teaching the little kids in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So the things that I was sharing with her, she was going back to her apartment complex, with the children in the neighborhood, not even her children, not her children, not her grandchildren, but the children in the neighborhood. She would engage with them around literacy and around reading,
Mm-hmm.
using just the things we had talked about and I had showed her.
Right.
Now she was impacting an entire community,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when we were talking, she let on that she was a bit skeptical about some of the things that I was, talking to her about what was really important. Like when he was 1, I was like, look, we don't need to do that hooked on phonics. We don't need to introduce flashcards. Only thing is important right now, you talk to him and you give him lots of different experiences around what y'all
Mm-hmm.
talk about, right? So
Right.
that's what's really important. And then I said, when it's time to develop alphabet knowledge, learn the alphabets, let's do it. We don't need flashcards. Well, let's get some of these things. Let's make the letters. Let's draw them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's trace them. Let him, all of those things. And she let
Mm-hmm.
on how she was initially skeptical, but it 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 was a transformative moment for me when she told me that she was taking just the things that we had talked about and sharing it with children in her community.
Yeah.
That's the power of when the knowledge is in the hands of the people,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can't contain it. And it's going to spread because it's not knowledge for an oppressive purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's knowledge to solve problems, to address
Mm-hmm.
issues, to bring about greater freedom and emancipation, which
Yeah.
is certainly what literacy does. And so to tie it all together, those are the ways that I've been really fortunate to work with the naysayers and the
Mm-hmm.
people that are hard to convince and that you can't buy in. I'm spending a lot less time talking,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and
Yeah, and it's
learning how to shake the dust off my feet when I need to.
mm-hmm. And throughout both of your stories, I hear like essence of kind of like modeling in a way, like similar to what we do with kids, but with each other as colleagues or co-community members, like that sort of thing. But that with that first narrative that you shared, that you were really showing this teacher that it's possible. You didn't
Yeah.
tell her, you just showed her, and then at some point, this shift became her being really interested in kind of emulating what you were doing and the connections you were able to make with those students.
Yeah. And then we were able to come back and have conversations about those anti-Black comments that she was making, because I wrote them down. I couldn't share it, but I couldn't keep that bottled up inside me.
Right.
So I came home and wrote them down. But after that moment, I could bring back up, the connection between what you think about these Black children and how you teach them.
Right.
Which at that point, she received.
That's so important. That's so important. So this is my last question, and I always like to kind of, as we're talking about like these school and classroom level factors that affect Black children, I like to have a conversation about the Black children themselves and our kind of dialogue or approach and connecting with them as individuals, and just like you mentioned, like how we think about them and overall. And so I know that our CRESTS program, that we are dedicated to providing education and transformative learning experiences to parents, educators, clinicians. But if there so happens to be a Black, Indigenous, or Latinx child or children right now listening to this video, what's one thing that you would want for them to know?
We see you.
Mm.
We love you. We believe you. Keep sharing your stories and your narrative. I haven't sat down to really allow myself to make sense of it, but it's not lost on me. And I think it's an important point to note that the young lady who captured the murder of George Floyd was a 17-year-old Black girl.
Mm-hmm.
They are courageous.
Mm-hmm.
They are brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
They have ingenuity. And when they are telling us that they've been violated,
Mm-hmm.
we have to start listening, and we have to so back to what you were saying, I want them to know that I want to partner with them. I want to listen, and I want to learn, and I want to build with them, and I want them to be at the helm of telling and showing me what's going on, and
Mm-hmm.
um, what should we be doing to make it right.
Yeah.
We've been sitting here with the answers all along.
Mm-hmm.
We've never wanted to be enslaved or oppressed. We've been sitting here with the answers all along,
Mm-hmm.
and our children have the answers. And if nothing, one of the things that this moment has really shown me, that our children have the answers, they have the resources, we need to
Mm-hmm.
put them on. And so, young
Yeah.
people, I'm ready to put y'all on.
Yeah. I love that. I honestly, as you were, telling the children, like, we see you, we love you, we hear you, and we believe you, like, I got chills. I feel like those were things that I needed to hear as a sixth grader. You're talking about yours as an elementary school student, up to the high school, the young woman that filmed the
Yeah.
unfortunate murder of George Floyd. And so I appreciate you saying that. I think that those are things that we need to be sharing with them, and often.
I mean, if you think about I've been thinking two things. Think about the things that we've been able to see about what's going on in classrooms with Black children. Black children are recording that and making it go viral because they know they're like, y'all aren't believing us. Y'all are treating us like we are the problem. Look at what is happening to us. Right? That is their cry. That's their rallying cry. And so I've been thinking about the power that they've taken in their hands with their cell phones, the visual testimony, and advocacy that they're doing for themselves because they feel they have to, and they should. But I've also been thinking about the backlash of that, just trying, you know, how we got to be strategic and think about, okay, how are restrictions on their cell phone use and recordings and stuff, how might that come into play? How do we protect their ability, their right to capture what's happening to them?
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
I've been really thinking about, okay, how do we get ahead of that and make sure their right and their freedom to capture what's happening to them is not taken away?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to again thank you so much, Dr. Acosta, for joining us today and sharing a little bit more about your paper with us. For the folks that are listening, if you haven't had a chance to review that paper just yet, definitely check it out on our CREST website, crestprogram.com. And so without further ado, I will go ahead and end the interview. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to connect with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.